What the hell is going on here? I snarled, slamming the bank statements down on the kitchen counter. The numbers stared back accusingly, thousands of dollars drained from my personal account over the past few months. Clay glanced up from his laptop, his chiseled jaw tightening. What are you ranting about now, Arya? I could hear the dismissive tone laced with irritation. Don't play dumb with me. Nearly 10 grand has disappeared from my savings account, and I want to know where it went. He scoffed, shaking his head as if I was overreacting. You're being ridiculous. It's our money. Doesn't matter whose account it's in. My blood boiled at his arrogant indifference. We'd had this circular argument too many times. That's my personal savings I've built up over years, Clay. My money from marketing clients and investments. You can't just drain it whenever you want. I had some extra expenses to cover for the team, that's all. Clay shrugged nonchalantly before returning his gaze to the laptop screen. No need to make a federal case out of it. I opened my mouth but quickly clamped it shut. Reasoning with him was futile when he got this cavalier. Something dark twisted in the pit of my stomach, an instinct I could no longer ignore. Look at me. My voice was quieter but laced with steel. Clay's eyes flicked up, finally registering my simmering anger. What? I'm not buying your excuses anymore, not this time. I leaned forward, gripping the counter's edge until my knuckles turned white. You're lying to me about something, and I'm going to find out what it is. A humorless laugh escaped his lips as he rose from his chair. You're being paranoid, babe. The company's doing great, and your dad's business is more successful than ever. There was that smug, placating tone again, the one designed to make me doubt myself and back down. Not this time. In a few strides I was nose to nose with Clay, no kitchen counter between us. Don't you dare bring my family into this. If you've done anything to jeopardize their company. His features hardened, and he grabbed my wrist, his grip just shy of bruising. You listen to me. I've given you a life most women only dream about, a nice home, vacations, financial security. Stop acting like an ungrateful, hysterical shrew and leave the money talk to me. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. That arrogant sneer and his dismissive words ignited something within me, a simmering rage I'd suppressed for too long. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade of our marriage began to splinter. His fingers dug painfully into my skin as he leaned closer. This jealousy and distrust doesn't look good on you, Arya. Now, why don't you go take a hot bath and let me worry about the finances like a good little wife? That was the final condescending blow I could take. With a strength born of pure fury, I wrenched my arm free from his grasp. You narcissistic bastard. Our marriage is one big financial lie. Well, I'm done being one of your blind little lambs. Clay's eyes widened slightly at my vehemence, but I didn't stick around to hear his pitiful excuses and insults. I spun on my heel and stormed out, the slam of the front door being the final punctuation on our fractured charade. The truth was out there somewhere, and nothing was going to stop me from finding it and bringing Clay's deceit into the scorching light. The next morning, I strode into Westbrook Marketing, feeling clear-headed for the first time in months. Clay had already left for the office, which was probably for the best. I needed time to think through my next moves without his toxic presence clouding my judgment. Everything okay? Dean, one of the top data analysts, peered at me with a concerned frown as I settled at my desk. I forced a tight smile, keenly aware that the entire office had likely overheard my explosive fight with Clay yesterday. Just a minor disagreement with my husband, but I'm fine, really. Dean didn't seem convinced, but gave a hesitant nod before returning to his work. I exhaled slowly, grateful that he didn't press further. I could sort through my marital problems on my own, starting by getting to the bottom of Clay's shady financial dealings. By lunchtime, I'd already dug up bank statements for the past year and created a meticulously detailed spreadsheet tracking where every cent of my savings and earnings had gone. The numbers told a disturbing story of frequent large withdrawals that Clay hadn't accounted for. He really is hemorrhaging your finances. A familiar voice made me jump. Lena stood over my shoulder, eyes narrowed at the incriminating spreadsheet. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Your door was open. I quickly waved her inside, relief flooding me that my oldest friend was here. Lena, I'm so glad you stopped by. Clay's been up to something underhanded for a while now, and I need your help nailing down what it is. She settled into the chair across from me, jaw set in a determined line. You know I've got your back, no matter what. Just tell me everything. Over the next hour, I recounted every sketchy comment and strange financial discrepancy involving Clay, from the missing funds to his illusions about covering expenses for his precious sales team. By the end, Lena's eyes had hardened to chips of green ice. That weaselly son of a bitch, she hissed, surprising me with her uncharacteristic venom. Don't worry, Arya, we'll make him pay for this deception, both financially and emotionally. I couldn't help the rush of gratitude and affection for my straight-shooting friend. Thank you, Lena. You have no idea how much it means to have you in my corner. Lena leaned forward, perfectly arched brows furrowed in thought. Okay, first thing we need to do is documentation. I'll draft a formal letter from my firm putting Clay on notice that his shady dealings won't be tolerated. We'll also need to look into your options for legal protection, just in case that slimeball tries anything underhanded. I nodded, finally feeling like I was taking back control. There's more. I think some of my dad's business funds may have also been compromised. Lena's eyes went wide with outrage. Clay stole from Max, too? Oh, that tears it. I'll make sure his expensive suits get taken away and he rots in prison. My lips twitched despite the circumstances. Only Lena could interweave snark and dogged loyalty so seamlessly. Slow down there, Bulldog. We need to gather hard proof first before looping in my dad. I placed a calming hand on her arm. For now, let's focus on legally protecting me and making sure Clay faces consequences for his thievery. Lena's severe expression softened slightly, and she gave a brisk nod. You're right. We do this methodically and by the book. God help that bastard once we put the screws to him. A sense of grim purpose settled over me. My marriage may have crumbled, but I refused to be another helpless victim of Clay's manipulation. With Lena's brilliant legal mind and my own determination, the deceitful facade was about to come crashing down. Justice and vengeance were on the horizon, and nothing would stop me from achieving both. Over the next few days, Lena and I compiled an airtight dossier documenting every suspicious transaction and questionable money trail involving Clay. My whole body thrummed with vindicated fury each time another piece of evidence materialized. I was bent over my laptop Friday evening, scouring Clay's company expenses yet again, when my cell phone buzzed with an incoming call from my dad. A knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't been ready to loop him in on this chaos just yet. Hey, Dad, what's up? I tried to keep my tone light. Arya, we need to talk. Max's gruff voice was laced with an uncharacteristic tension. It's about your husband and the company finances. I felt the blood drain from my face as realization crashed over me. Lena and I had been so focused on Clay's personal deception that we missed how deeply his thievery may have penetrated into my father's business world. I'm on my way over now, I said, already grabbing my purse and car keys. When I arrived at Max's house 20 minutes later, he was waiting in the den, a grim countenance etched on his chiseled features. This couldn't be good. His piercing gaze met mine as I entered. You weren't going to tell me about that snake, Clayton, misappropriating funds from my marketing software firm? I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. How did he find out? As if sensing my question, Max jerked his chin towards the love seat. Your friend Dean came to see me, showed me documents indicating your husband's been skimming money from client accounts and grossly overbilling. There was Dean, looking appropriately abashed at having spilled the beans. But his eyes were resolute. He clearly saw this as the moral thing to do. I'm so sorry, Arya, he said sincerely. I couldn't just stand by while Clay kept robbing your family like that. Not after all Max has done for the company and his employees. A surge of affection for my ethical colleague washed over me. No, Dean, you did the right thing. I was trying to gather proof before bringing this to Dad's attention. Max let out a gruff noise of assent. Good thinking. We'll need to blow that rat scheme out into the open with irrefutable evidence. For the next hour, Dean outlined the improper billing and accounting discrepancies, while I shared the documentation Lena and I had compiled regarding the personal finances. By the end, a pall of grim determination had settled over the three of us. So, I cleared my throat, keeping my voice as steady as possible. What's our next move to take down Clay? The muscle in Max's taut jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. We keep gathering proof, but don't make a move against him until we've got the full scope of his thievery. Lena's helping with this, I assume? I nodded. She's already got me separated financially and is working on legal protection just in case Clay retaliates. The barest hint of a smile played across Dean's lips. Smart woman, that Lena. Max slapped his hand down on the desk with a dull thud. Good. Clayton Barrett has messed with the wrong family this time. We'll hit him with everything we've got until that con man is destitute and behind bars where he belongs. The sheer venom in my normally stoic father's voice made me flinch. But I couldn't fault his fury. Clay had well and truly betrayed us all. I want to take the lead on this, I stated in a low voice. Clay's my husband, and his deception cuts the deepest with me. My dad's eyes bored into mine for a long moment before giving a solemn nod of agreement. Damn right, kiddo. We're all behind you 100% to take that scumbag down. Dean put a reassuring hand on my shoulder and gave it a supportive squeeze. United with the most important men in my life, a wave of fierce resolve washed over me. I would make Clay pay for every last cent he'd stolen. More importantly, I'd shatter the twisted facade he'd constructed and regain my sense of self, my independence, once and for all. The games were over. The reckoning had officially begun. Over the next few weeks, a cold determination took root within me, hardening my resolve with each new, unraveled deception. Thanks to Dean's diligent record-keeping and Lena's legal prowess, the full, sickening scope of Clay's financial crimes came into focus. Not only had he embezzled funds from my personal accounts, but he'd expertly skimmed money from client billings at my father's company through a complex system of shell corporations and insider deals with shady third-party vendors. His greed and arrogance knew no bounds. Your bastard husband has been bleeding us dry for years, Dad growled, poring over the documentation one evening. The muscle in his weathered jaw twitched with barely restrained fury. We've got him nailed to the wall on multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, you name it. Lena's lips curved into a predatory smile, green eyes glinting with vengeful triumph. That double-crossing snake is going down hard. While settling the legal noose around Clay's neck, Lena and Dean were also advising me on establishing financial independence, securing credit and assets solely in my name, squirreling away cash reserves in preparation for an inevitable divorce battle. I'd be damned if I let Clayton manipulate me into domestic violence victim territory, living off grudging alimony scraps. With every dossier review and money trail unraveled, my own sense of self-determination deepened. The insidious fog of marital gaslighting that Clay had woven now dissipated in the cold, harsh light of his deceptions. He'd inflicted the cruelest form of betrayal by robbing from my family while eroding my sense of self-worth. But like the mythological phoenix, I was rising from the ashes of my codependent naivete. Arya, we've got everything lined up to crush that weasel, Lena said, jaw set in a grim line. The million-dollar question is, do you want to confront Clayton before or after we lower the legal boom? I stared her down, body humming with a buzzing undercurrent of wrath. While part of me wanted the smug shock value of blindsiding Clay after he'd been indicted on multiple felonies, I knew that wasn't my style. More importantly, I wanted to look into his cold, vapid eyes when I ripped the mask off his deceitful facade, to leave no doubt that I outwitted and overpowered him at every turn. And so it was that I found myself gripping the damning evidence file with white knuckles as I strode into Clay's hotel suite 3 nights later. He'd been traveling on yet another regional manager trip, code for some extended tryst with a mistress bankrolled by his ill-gotten gains. Working a bit late tonight, aren't we? His lips split into that annoyingly cocky grin I'd once found charming as I stepped into the dimly lit living area. He drained the last sip of scotch from his tumbler. To what do I owe the pleasure of this surprise visit, Mrs. Barrett? The overwhelming stench of Scheiper perfume, his latest tawdry conquest no doubt, wafted from the bedroom suite. My grip tightened further on the file until the edges crinkled. Cut the smarmy bullshit, Clay. You and I both know surprise visits have never been your forte. His lopsided smirk faltered ever so slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Summoning every last ounce of icy calm I possessed, I strode forward and slammed the thick evidence file onto the marble-topped cocktail table, scattering the contents in a frenzied spiral of incriminating documents and bank statements. "It means I know everything, you degenerate sack of shit." The words hissed through my gritted teeth. "Every illicit transfer, every shady account, every penny you stole from me and my family's company while parading around like some high-rolling corporate raider." Clay's face turned to stone as the gravity of the situation came crashing down around him. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't bother lying or feigning innocence. That ship sailed the moment you helped yourself to my life savings to fund your tawdry affairs and inflated expense accounts." I allowed myself a grim half-smile at the utterly bewildered look on his face. "What, you thought I'd never catch on? That I'd stay your meek, obedient little wife forever while you conned me blind?" Clay's jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin line. "You've got it all wrong, Arya. I can explain every last cent." With a rough jerk of his arm, he swiped the damning papers off the cocktail table in an angry clatter. "The company's been going through some transitional headaches, but I have it all under control. As for your money, I told you before, it's our assets pooled together." "Our assets?" I let out a humorless bark of laughter. "Wake up and smell the jail cell you've earned yourself. Those convoluted money trails and insider deals prove you bilked literally millions from my father's firm and my own accounts." Clay visibly paled at my words, but leveled his patented ice-cold glare my way. "You ungrateful little bitch. Is this the thanks I get for providing you a life of luxury? I'll bury you and that senile old prick Max in litigation until you're both bankrupt shells." White-hot anger spiked through me, momentarily stealing my breath at his callous arrogance. I stood there shaking with rage while he fumed and blathered more hollow threats and deflections. Finally, I raised my hand again, silencing his tirade. When I spoke, the tone was low and measured, yet laced with undisguised disgust. "Let me make one thing crystal clear, you sniveling worm. The free ride is over. No more embezzling from my family's hard-earned assets. No more living a champagne lifestyle by robbing from everyone around you with sociopathic glee." My gaze bored into his, ensuring he registered the full gravity and finality of my next words. "I want a divorce, Clay. And I'll make sure you're left with nothing but a future of hand-me-down suits and prison-issued jumpsuits once the law catches up to your racketeering." In that instant, any facade of control Clay maintained came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Letting out a feral roar of rage, he lunged across the marble table and grabbed me by the shoulders, his grip punishing and brutal. "You stupid, delusional whore. Everything I built, every bloody advantage and connection I've cultivated, was for us, for our future." He gave me a vicious shake, splattering spittle across my face. "You'll never be anything more than a worthless trust fund brat without me." While part of me inwardly recoiled from the menacing violence radiating off him in waves, I remained utterly impassive, staring back at him with eyes made of granite. I'd prepared myself for the inevitability of his volcanic reaction to the truth. "We're done here," I enunciated each word with surgical precision, refusing to give him an inch while twisting free of his grasp. "The company and my father's legal team will deal with you appropriately from here on out." Snatching up the scattered papers and folders, I spun on my heel and strode for the suite door, movements cold and economical. I'd feigned bravery many times in the face of Clay's posturing before, but no longer. "You dare walk away from me? You ungrateful little cunt!" His voice dripped with venom and wounded ego as he grabbed my arm in a vice-like grip. "I'll bury you in litigation hell until you—" His spittle-laced tirade was cut short as a thick muscular arm clamped around his windpipe from behind, squeezing just shy of full restriction. The imposing form of my dad loomed over Clay's suddenly panicked expression. "That's enough out of you, dirtbag." Max's tone was lethal calm as he shoved Clay backwards, allowing him to flounder and gasp for air. "Threaten my little girl again, and the next grip crushes your trachea." The explosive introduction of my father's imposing presence clearly gave Clay pause, and he staggered back a few steps, knuckles whitening around his abused neck. I allowed myself a tight, triumphant smirk as I took in the scene. "Guess we're done with the false pretenses and sugarcoating the truth. My father's company is pressing charges against you for embezzling over $5 million from the firm's client account. Not to mention the multiple fraud and tax evasion charges awaiting once the authorities start digging into your slush funds and bogus vendors. You have no proof. Clay wheezed, beads of sweat speckled across his flushed brow. My lawyers will grind this joke of an accusation into the dirt. My expression hardened. Don't insult our intelligence. Between the paper trail linking your offshore accounts to dozens of improper money transfers and Dean's verified records from within the firm, you're beyond cooked. Dad took a menacing step forward. Any minute now, the local police and feds will be swarming this hotel on our call. Plenty of proof to take you into custody while we build the criminal case against you. Clay's veneer of composure was crumbling rapidly. I could see the panic beginning to set in behind his eyes as the sheer futility of his situation dawned on him. Arya, think about what you're doing. You destroy me here, and I'll make sure you and your whole clueless family are destitute within a year. I let out a hollow peal of laughter, unfazed by his desperate threats. Keep flapping your gums, you degenerate snake. The only things you'll be making from now on are license plates and shivs for your new cellmates. Taking one last look at his sweaty, bulging-eyed countenance, I tossed the evidence folder at his feet in a contemptuous shower of documents. Thanks for the memories, Clayton. Your vile actions have freed me in ways you'll never understand. With that parting shot, I turned and strode from the room, my father falling into lockstep beside me. Sweet, heady relief washed over me with every passing step away from the soon-to-be prison-bound wretch. The worst was behind me. All that remained was basking in the restorative justice to come. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of police interviews, emergency board meetings at my father's company, and Clay's increasingly desperate attempts to bully his way out of the mounting charges. But Lena had the situation on ironclad legal lockdown. Armed with the comprehensive evidence we'd compiled, she deftly maneuvered past each of Clay's pitiful objections and stall tactics from his admittedly slick team of corporate lawyers. It all came to a head at an emergency board meeting, convened to decide Clay's immediate fate with the company. With the Department of Justice breathing down our necks, a rapid resolution was required before the feds applied for an asset freeze on all revenue tied to his alleged fraud. This is a personal vendetta orchestrated by my estranged wife and her lunatic family. Clay's voice echoed through the stifling conference room as the proceedings kicked off. He stabbed a manicured finger at me where I sat flanked by Lena and Max. Arya has manufactured these wild fabrications out of spite because I dared file for divorce first. A low rumble of incredulous muttering filled the room from the assembled board members and executives. Even his staunchest old boy enablers seemed skeptical of that narrative given the overwhelmingly detailed evidence. That's enough, Mr. Barrett. Roger Kingsley, CEO of our parent corporation, spoke in a clipped, no-nonsense tone as he rapped his knuckles on the glossy tabletop. The forensic auditors and federal investigators have compiled more than enough documentation exposing your complex money laundering and theft from client accounts. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Clay's face go pallid, sweat beading on his taut brow. He opened his mouth to object, but Roger raised a solitary hand, silencing him. Furthermore, bank records and electronic data trails show you repeatedly pillaged marketing funds and cash reserves to finance your lavish personal expenditures and indiscretions. The older man's eyes blazed with undisguised contempt behind his wireframe glasses. Clay's Adam's apple bobbed rapidly as each new damning revelation piled atop the last, effectively burying him in an avalanche of incriminating facts. In light of this overwhelming evidence and the legal liability you represent, you're hereby stripped of all corporate authority and terminated for moral turpitude, effective immediately. Roger punctuated the statement by slamming his palm down on the table with a dull thud. This is an outrageous miscarriage of justice. Clay shot to his feet, face mottled with fury as he shouted down at the impassive Kingsley. When my legal team is through with your corrupt evidence and sham proceedings, none of you will have jobs. He whirled towards me, eyes mere slits of impotent rage. You'll regret letting your psychotic need for revenge open this Pandora's box, Arya. At that moment, the double doors at the rear of the conference room banged open with a clatter. Two grim-faced U.S. Marshals in crisp blue windbreakers strode in, flanking a diminutive woman in a no-nonsense navy pantsuit. Clayton Barrett? The petite woman's voice carried a commanding presence that belied her stature as she addressed the now bewildered Clay. My name is Sarah Wilkins, special agent with the FBI's Fraud Investigation Unit. She allowed the slightest hint of a thin smile to crease her severe features. You're under arrest for multiple counts of money laundering, embezzlement, tax evasion, and corporate fraud. Anything you say can and will be used against you. For a moment, the room hung in stunned silence as two burly deputy marshals advanced and cuffed the now sputtering Clay, his jaw working furiously, but no words emerging. I turned a grateful eye towards Lena, who was sporting a rather self-satisfied grin as she watched her tormentor being hauled away, his expensive suit and disheveled hair the only remnants of the facade he'd so arrogantly maintained for years. Don't look so smug just yet, a nasal voice snarled as Clay caught my eye. You'll slip on a banana peel one of these days, Arya. And when you hit rock bottom with nothing and no one, maybe you'll appreciate the life I tried to build us. With that pathetic departing shot, the marshals wrestled Clay out of the room as Roger addressed the remaining shell-shocked assemblage. Thank you all for your patience and discretion during this catastrophic legal matter. I assure you, once the dust settles, we'll rebuild Kingsley Marketing to be an even stronger firm, one where ethics and public trust aren't merely corporate platitudes. As the meeting dispersed amid a low buzz of scandal-tinged chatter, Lena pulled me aside with an almost feral look of vindicated triumph shining in her eyes. Well, your lying, cheating snake of an ex just got his jaw-dropping comeuppance. Her smile was all shark-like bravado. That smug prick won't know what hit him once the weight of the federal indictments really sinks in. Though I should have been elated at Clay's unceremonious apprehension and professional demise, an inexplicable pang of melancholy tugged at my chest as I headed home. Maybe it was the raw fury and hate still radiating off him like body heat, or the glaring truth that any remnant of the decent, driven man I fell for was permanently extinguished. Either way, the facade keeping us together as husband and wife had finally been obliterated, by my own hand, no less. I shuddered to think what Clayton's next moves might entail as the walls closed in. Whatever happened, I refused to surrender one more ounce of power or self-respect to that cancerous relationship. Clay's bombastic implosion and arrest were just the opening salvo in what would become a brutally drawn-out legal battle over the coming months. While federal prosecutors steadily built their sweeping racketeering case against him, my divorce attorneys initiated a blitzkrieg of personal litigation simultaneously. Armed with Lena's meticulous documentation of Clay's myriad financial crimes and personal indiscretions, they systematically dismantled the facade of his frivolous annulment filings, one after another. Within weeks, the galling reality of my inevitable full divorce and asset separation sunk in for the incarcerated Clay. He retaliated with the only tactics he knew, intimidation and unbridled cruelty. Venomous phone calls and letters arrived with escalating frequency, each more vile and threatening than the last as he grew increasingly desperate in his quest for leverage. Take a look at this latest missive from your sociopath ex-hubby. Lena tossed a crumpled sheaf of papers onto my kitchen counter one afternoon, mouth twisted with disgust. I scanned the pages with a weary sigh, unsurprised to find more of Clay's all-too-familiar bile regurgitated in angry, looping scrawls. Details of sordid sexual escapades and expletive-laced insults filled the rantings, clear attempts to shame and demean me. How original. More pathetic Mako intimidation when he can't win on merits. I tossed the pages aside, unfazed by his bluster at this point. Keep tabs on these unhinged tangents in case we need a restraining order. The fact was, Clay Barrett's downfall had accelerated into a horrifying death spiral, stripping away every vestige of the arrogant blue blood success he'd so carefully cultivated over the years. Within 6 months, every asset in his name, from the Hamptons Beach House to his beloved Mercedes-AMG Coupe and Patek Philippe watch collection, were liquidated and frozen to satisfy hundreds of thousands in mounting legal fees and potential restitution penalties. By the following fall, Grim-faced federal agents arrived at the downtown luxury loft I'd purchased solely in my name and rousted Clay away to await trial. His previously buffed and groomed veneer was now replaced by a hunched, haunted look, dark circles engulfing his deadened eyes as marshals shackled and led him into a waiting transport van. "Don't get too comfortable in your ivory tower, sweetheart," he called over his shoulder at me, desperation and hatred dripping from his words. "Once I take these lying monsters down in court and prove my innocence, you'll be broke and homeless without me." I merely stared back at him, features blank and impassive, while inwardly marveling at how swiftly the mighty could crumble under the weight of their own sins and arrogance. My independence was secure. The last 2 years of meticulous legal groundwork by Lena and Max had ensured no messy asset retaliation or convoluted reversal of fortune. Clay would face his reckoning alone and destitute, exactly as I'd vowed. As the battered transport van pulled away with my disgraced ex in tow, I turned and headed back inside, the faintest ghost of a relieved smile teasing my lips. I was free. As the dust settled in the months following Clay's dramatic imprisonment and our acrimonious divorce finalization, a profound sense of relief and renewal washed over me. Gone were the constant mind games, the gaslighting, the endless cycle of walking on eggshells around his volatile ego and emasculated rage. For the first time in over a decade, I was beholden to no one but myself, free from the shackles of codependence and manipulation that Clay had so insidiously bound me with. The very notion made me want to shout from the rooftops in pure, uninhibited elation. Instead, I channeled that euphoric energy into reclaiming my sense of self-worth and blazing new trails, both personally and professionally. This new chapter demanded a clean slate. "You've paid your dues and conquered that sadistic monster, kiddo?" Dad clasped my shoulder affectionately as we strolled through the bustling downtown streets one crisp autumn evening. "Time to spread your wings and truly soar now that he can't hold you back." I gave him an appreciative smile and reciprocated the squeeze, marveling at how our previous fractures and strained codependency had mended throughout this tumultuous stretch. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have regained my footing without you and Lena relentlessly in my corner." "Don't thank me yet," he chuckled gruffly, waggling his eyebrows. "You've got the hard-driving business acumen that's kept this family soaring for decades. The company's marketing team is yours for the taking if you'll have it." While the prospect of leading my father's pride and joy venture filled me with no small trepidation, I couldn't deny the allure of that challenge, of proving I could helm a thriving enterprise by my own merits after everything with Clay. Embracing his poisoned legacy of deception and fear would be the ultimate cleansing rebirth. "You've got yourself a deal, old man." Squaring my shoulders defiantly, I allowed a self-assured grin to spread across my face. "I'll make you proud and elevate that team to unprecedented heights." By the following spring, I'd firmly rooted myself as managing director of Kingsley Marketing, orchestrating a full-scale creative and strategic overhaul that propelled the once-imperiled agency back into profitability. Every boardroom negotiation, every hard-won new client acquisition and ensuing celebration was a cold slap of validation that I'd finally untangled myself from Clay's toxic web. And indeed, any faint murmurs of my disgraced ex's lingering animosity vanished once he was remanded to federal prison on a dizzying array of fraud and financial laundering convictions. After smugly short-circuiting the legal process for months with a cavalcade of motions and delay tactics, that first shocking footage of Clayton being led shackled from the courthouse in a tattered blue jumpsuit spread like wildfire through our professional circles. By all accounts, he faced a harsh, uncompromising stretch of 15 to 20 years behind bars, with financial penalties astronomical enough to ensure he'd never reclaim his previously high-flying lifestyle and ego upon release. Yet in stark contrast to his humiliating downfall, I found myself scaling new professional peaks and embracing profound personal growth daily. Quickly establishing a reputation as a dynamic leader with integrity and vision, I fielded a dizzying array of career opportunities beyond the Kingsley umbrella. Turning down those lucrative offers was as gratifying as shedding those final invisible shackles of my traumatic marital past. Instead, I poured my energies into not just professional achievements, but but selflessly mentoring other women, striving to sidestep the cycles of domestic turmoil and subjugation that I'd narrowly escaped, inspiring them to harness their innate self-worth and chart their own ambitious courses, just as Lena and my father had shown me in my darkest hours. At last, I was the master of my own destiny, a thriving phoenix risen from the ashes of Clayton Barrett's twisted agenda with wings spanning ever further horizons. No longer would I be defined by his deceptions and cruelties, or wilt under his stifling control. I'd confronted those shadows head-on and emerged reborn into the self-possessed, confident woman I was always meant to become. The phone rang, shattering the silence of our kitchen. I reached for it, but Bradley snatched it away, his eyes darting nervously. "I'll get it," he mumbled, disappearing into his study. I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, sauce forgotten on the stove. That wasn't like Bradley at all. In 12 years of marriage, we'd never hidden calls from each other. Something was off, and I could feel it in my bones. "Mom, is dinner ready?" Emily's voice startled me out of my thoughts. Our 12-year-old daughter stood in the doorway, nose buried in her phone. "Almost, sweetie. Why don't you set the table?" As Emily begrudgingly put down her phone, I stirred the sauce, my mind racing. When had things changed? Bradley and I used to be the perfect couple, college sweethearts who'd built a life together. Now it felt like we were drifting apart, and I couldn't pinpoint why. The study door opened, and Bradley emerged, his face a mask of forced cheerfulness. "Sorry about that, honey. Work call. On a Sunday evening?" I raised an eyebrow. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "You know how it is. The Johnson account is giving us trouble." I nodded, unconvinced. The Bradley I married would have shared the details asked for my input. This Bradley was a stranger. Dinner was a quiet affair, punctuated only by Emily's chatter about school and her friends. I watched Bradley push his food around his plate, his mind clearly elsewhere. "How about we all go for ice cream after dinner?" I suggested, desperate to recapture some of our old family magic. Emily's face lit up, but Bradley shook his head. "Sorry, I've got some work to finish up. You two go ahead." As I cleared the dishes, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the window. When had we become these people? This isn't what I'd imagined when I said "I do" all those years ago. "Mom?" Emily's voice pulled me back to reality. "Can we still go for ice cream?" I forced a smile. "Of course, sweetie. Let me grab my purse." As we walked to the ice cream parlor, the warm evening air did little to dispel the chill in my heart. Emily chattered away, oblivious to my inner turmoil. "Mom, why is Dad always working now?" she asked suddenly, her voice small. I stumbled, caught off guard by her perceptiveness. "Well, honey, sometimes adults have to work hard to provide for their families." She frowned, unconvinced. "But he never wants to do anything with us anymore." My heart ached at the truth in her words. "I'm sure it's just temporary, sweetie. Things will get better." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Back home, I found Bradley in his study, door firmly closed. I knocked gently. "Brad, can we talk?" He opened the door, looking haggard. "What is it, Laura? I'm swamped here." I miss you. We miss you. Emily was asking about you earlier." His expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. "I'm doing this for us, Laura, for our future." "But what about our present?" I pleaded. "We need you here now." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I can't do this right now. We'll talk later, okay?" As the door closed in my face, I felt a surge of anger and hurt. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the life I'd signed up for. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Your husband is lying to you. Meet me tomorrow at noon, Central Park bench near the duck pond. Come alone." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Who was this? What did they know? As I deleted the message, one thing became clear. Our perfect life was about to shatter, and I had no idea how to stop it. I stared at the moving boxes piled high in our living room, a lump forming in my throat. This wasn't how I'd imagined spending my 40th birthday. "Mom, where should I put these?" Emily asked, struggling with a box labeled kitchen. "Just leave it there, sweetie. We'll sort it out later." I forced a smile, trying to hide my unease. Bradley burst through the front door, grinning from ear to ear. "Isn't this great? Back in my old hometown, new job, fresh start for all of us." I nodded weakly, remembering the career I'd left behind in the city. "Yeah, great." "Oh, come on, Laura. This is a fantastic opportunity for us," Bradley said, his enthusiasm grating on my nerves. "For you, you mean?" I muttered under my breath. What was that? Nothing, I said, plastering on a fake smile. Just thinking about all the unpacking we need to do. The doorbell rang, saving me from further conversation. I opened it to find Cynthia, Bradley's mother, standing there with a casserole dish. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she trilled, pushing past me into the house. "Oh, Bradley, darling, how wonderful to have you back home." I watched as she enveloped Bradley in a hug, completely ignoring Emily and me. Some things never change. "Laura," Cynthia said, finally acknowledging my presence. "I hope you'll be able to adjust to small-town life. It's quite different from your big city ways." "I'm sure I'll manage," I replied, gritting my teeth. Cynthia bustled into the kitchen, making herself at home. "Now, let me show you how to properly organize this space. I'm sure you'll need the help." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that this was Bradley's mother. But as she rearranged my carefully packed kitchen items, criticizing everything from my choice of cutlery to my cooking utensils, I felt my patience wearing thin. "Mom," Bradley called from the living room, "I forgot to mention I invited some old friends over for dinner tonight to celebrate our move." I froze, my hands full of mismatched Tupperware. "Tonight? Bradley, we just got here. The house is a mess, and I haven't even unpacked the groceries yet." He waved off my concerns. "It's just a casual get-together. They won't mind." Cynthia piped up, "Oh, don't worry, dear. I'll take care of everything. You clearly need the help." I closed my eyes, counting to 10. When I opened them, I saw Emily watching me with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" she whispered. I nodded, pulling her into a hug. "I'm fine, sweetie, just a little overwhelmed." As the evening wore on, our house filled with Bradley's old friends. I plastered on a smile, playing the role of the happy wife while Cynthia held court in the kitchen, regaling everyone with stories of Bradley's childhood. "Remember when you won the state spelling bee?" she gushed. "Always knew you'd do great things, unlike some people who give up their careers at the drop of a hat." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. "Mom," Bradley warned, but the damage was done. I excused myself, fleeing to the back porch. The cool night air did little to calm my racing heart. What had I done? I'd given up everything, my job, my friends, my independence, for this. The porch door creaked open behind me. I turned, expecting Bradley, but instead found Emily. "Mom," she said softly, "I heard Grandma talking to Dad. She said you're not good enough for him, that he could do better." My heart shattered. I pulled Emily close, stroking her hair. "Oh, sweetie, that's not true. Your grandma she just wants what's best for your dad. But what about what's best for you?" Emily asked, her voice muffled against my shirt. I had no answer. As we stood there, the sounds of laughter drifting from inside, I realized I'd never felt more alone. Something had to change, and soon. But what could I do, trapped in this new life I never wanted? The porch door opened again. This time it was Bradley. "Laura? Mom's looking for you. She needs help serving dessert." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Coming," I said, my voice hollow. As I walked back into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap of my own making. The library's quiet hum was a welcome respite from the chaos at home. I shelved books methodically, losing myself in the familiar routine. It wasn't the high-powered career I'd left behind, but it was something that was mine. "Laura, dear?" Mrs. Henderson, the head librarian, approached. "There's a call for you at the front desk. It's your mother-in-law." My stomach clenched. What could Cynthia want now? I picked up the phone, bracing myself. "Hello, Cynthia." "Laura, I've had the most wonderful idea," she gushed. "We should all go to the lake house this weekend. It'll be perfect for family bonding." I bit back a groan. "This weekend? I'm not sure if—" "Nonsense. I've already spoken to Bradley, and he thinks it's marvelous. Emily will love it too, I'm sure." Of course, she'd gone behind my back. "Cynthia, I really don't think—" "It's settled then. We'll leave Friday afternoon. Do try to be punctual, dear." The line went dead before I could protest further. I slumped against the desk, defeat washing over me. That evening, I broached the subject with Bradley. "Your mother called about a lake house trip?" He barely looked up from his phone. "Oh yeah, sounds great, doesn't it?" "Bradley, we can't just drop everything and go. I have work, and Emily has her dance recital practice." He finally met my gaze, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Come on, Laura. It's just a weekend. Mom's trying to make an effort here. Can't you do the same?" I bit my tongue, choking back the words I really wanted to say. Fine, for Emily's sake. Friday arrived too soon. As we packed the car, Cynthia bustled around, criticizing everything from my choice of snacks to the way I folded Emily's clothes. Really, Laura, she tutted. Don't you know how to pack properly? Here, let me show you. I clenched my fists, forcing a smile. Thanks, Cynthia, but I've got it under control. The drive to the lake house was tense. Emily sat silently in the back, headphones firmly in place. Bradley chatted with his mother, both of them ignoring me completely. As we pulled up to the lake house, I had to admit it was beautiful. The sun glinted off the water, and the air smelled of pine and possibility. Isn't it wonderful? Cynthia crowed. Bradley, remember when we used to come here every summer? How could I forget, Mom? Best times of my life. I lugged our bags inside, feeling like an outsider in my own family. The weekend crawled by in a haze of forced smiles and thinly veiled insults. Cynthia dominated every conversation, regaling us with tales of Bradley's childhood and not-so-subtle digs at my parenting. Emily, darling, she said over dinner, has your mother taught you how to make my famous pot roast yet? Oh, that's right, Laura isn't much of a cook, is she? I gripped my fork tighter, willing myself not to react. On Sunday morning, I escaped to the dock, desperate for a moment of peace. The lake stretched out before me, calm and indifferent to my turmoil. Mom? Emily's voice startled me. Are you okay? I turned to find my daughter watching me with worried eyes. I'm fine, sweetie. Just enjoying the view. She sat beside me, her legs dangling over the water. I don't like it here, she confessed. Grandma's always so mean to you. My heart ached. Oh, honey, it's not. It's complicated. Adult relationships can be tricky sometimes. But Dad never stands up for you? Doesn't he love you anymore? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Before I could answer, Bradley's voice rang out from the house. Laura, Mom needs help in the kitchen, I sighed, squeezing Emily's hand. We should go back. As we walked towards the house, I caught sight of Bradley through the window. He was hunched over his phone, a secretive smile on his face. My stomach churned with a familiar dread. Just then his phone pinged loudly. Cynthia, passing by, glanced at the screen. Her eyes widened, then narrowed as she looked at me. Laura, dear, she called, her voice sickly sweet. Could you come here for a moment? There's something we need to discuss. I froze, my heart pounding. Whatever was coming, I knew it wouldn't be good. With a deep breath, I stepped into the house, bracing myself for the storm that was about to break. I stepped into the lake house, my heart pounding. Cynthia's saccharine smile sent chills down my spine. Laura, dear, she cooed. I couldn't help but notice something on Bradley's phone. I think you should see it. Bradley's head snapped up, his face paling. Mom, that's private. But Cynthia had already thrust the phone into my hands. On the screen was a text message from someone named Amber. The words blurred before my eyes, but one phrase stood out. Can't wait to see you again, baby. The room spun. I looked at Bradley, searching for denial, explanation, anything. But his guilty expression said it all. How long? I whispered. Laura, it's not what you think. How? Long? I repeated, my voice stronger now. Cynthia interjected, her voice dripping with false concern. Now, Laura, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. I whirled on her. Stay out of this, Cynthia. This is between me and your son. Bradley stood, reaching for me. Laura, please. It's just a work thing. Amber's a colleague. A colleague you call baby? I spat. Do you think I'm stupid? Emily appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. Mom? Dad? What's going on? The sight of our daughter snapped me back to reality. I couldn't do this here, not in front of her. I took a deep breath, forcing calm into my voice. Nothing, sweetie, just a misunderstanding. Why don't you go pack your things? We're leaving. But we're supposed to stay until tomorrow, Emily protested. Plans change, I said firmly. Please, Emily, just do as I ask. As Emily reluctantly trudged upstairs, I turned back to Bradley. We'll discuss this at home, privately. The drive back was excruciating. Emily sat in the back seat, headphones on, oblivious to the tension crackling between Bradley and me. Cynthia had tried to intervene, but I'd shut her down with a glare that could have melted steel. At home, I sent Emily to her room, promising we'd talk later. Then I rounded on Bradley. Explain, I demanded. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not what you think, Laura. Amber's just a friend. Don't lie to me, I exploded. Friends don't text like that. How long has this been going on? Is this why you wanted to move back here? Bradley's face hardened. You know what? Maybe if you hadn't been so caught up in your own career, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere for support. His words hit me like a slap. My career? The one I gave up for you? Oh, please, he scoffed. You've been resentful ever since we moved. You never gave this place a chance. You never gave my family a chance. Your family? I laughed bitterly. You mean your mother, who's been undermining me at every turn? Who treats me like I'm not good enough for her precious son? See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're always playing the victim. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. Do you even love me anymore? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Bradley spoke, his voice low. I don't know, Laura. I don't know if I have for a long time. Something inside me shattered. I stumbled back, gripping the kitchen counter for support. I think, I said, my voice shaking, that you should leave. Tonight. I can't look at you right now. Bradley nodded, defeat etched in every line of his face. As he trudged upstairs to pack a bag, I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. A small hand touched my shoulder. I looked up to see Emily, tears streaming down her face. Mom, she whispered, are you and Dad getting a divorce? I pulled her close, stroking her hair. I don't know, sweetie. I really don't know. As we clung to each other on the kitchen floor, I realized I had a decision to make. Fight for a marriage that might already be beyond saving, or find the strength to start over. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. The days after Bradley left were a blur of tears and sleepless nights. I moved through the house like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. Emily watched me with worried eyes, but I couldn't find the words to comfort her when I could barely hold myself together. It was on a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I was folding laundry, mindlessly matching socks, when Emily burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. Mom, I got the lead in the school play, she exclaimed, waving a script in her hand. I forced a smile, trying to muster enthusiasm. That's wonderful, sweetie. What's the play? Romeo and Juliet, she said, her eyes shining. Then her face fell. But I need to stay after school for rehearsals. Dad usually picks me up, but... The unfinished sentence hung in the air, heavy with implications. I swallowed hard, pushing down the lump in my throat. Don't worry, I'll figure something out. Emily hesitated, then blurted out, Mom, is Dad living with Amber now? The sock I was holding slipped from my fingers. What? Emily, how do you know about Amber? She looked down, scuffing her toe against the carpet. I overheard Dad talking to her on the phone, before the lake house trip. He said he loved her. The world tilted on its axis. I gripped the edge of the laundry basket, trying to steady myself. Emily, why didn't you tell me? Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't want to hurt you, and I thought maybe if I pretended everything was okay, it would be. I pulled her into a fierce hug, my own tears falling into her hair. Oh, sweetie, this isn't your burden to bear. I'm so sorry you've been carrying this secret. As Emily sobbed in my arms, a cold fury settled in my chest. Bradley hadn't just betrayed me, he'd put our daughter in an impossible position. After Emily had cried herself out and gone to her room, I reached for my phone with shaking hands. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Lily, it's Laura. I need your help. My best friend's voice was warm and concerned. Laura, what's wrong? It's Bradley, I said, my voice breaking. He's been having an affair. I think I need a divorce lawyer. Lily's sharp intake of breath crackled over the line. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Listen, I know a great family law attorney. I'll send you her details. But Laura, are you sure about this? I closed my eyes, seeing Emily's tear-stained face in my mind. I have to be. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. After hanging up, I sat on the bed, my mind racing. The thought of divorce terrified me. How would we manage financially? What would happen to Emily? But the alternative, staying in a loveless marriage, watching my daughter suffer in silence, was unthinkable. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Emily peeked in, her face pale and drawn. Mom, can I sleep in here tonight? I patted the bed beside me, and she crawled in, curling up against me like she used to when she was little. As I stroked her hair, a fierce determination welled up inside me. Emily, I said softly, I want you to know that whatever happens between your dad and me, it's not your fault, and I will always, always be here for you. She nodded against my shoulder, her voice muffled. Are you going to divorce Dad? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. I took a deep breath, knowing my answer would change everything. I think I have to, sweetie, for both of us. As Emily's breathing evened out in sleep, I stared at the ceiling, my mind made up. Tomorrow, I would call the lawyer Lily recommended. Tomorrow, I would take the first step towards reclaiming my life and protecting my daughter. It wouldn't be easy. Bradley and Cynthia would fight me every step of the way. But as I held Emily close, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a victim. It was time to fight back. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, like it contained more than just paper. It held the weight of my shattered world. I'd hired a private investigator last week using the money I'd been saving for Emily's college fund. It felt wrong, but I needed to know the truth. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Photos spilled out onto the kitchen table. Bradley and a young blonde woman, laughing over coffee, holding hands in the park, kissing outside an unfamiliar apartment building. My stomach churned as I flipped through them, each image a knife to my heart. The investigator's report was clinical, detailing times, dates, and locations. Bradley had been seeing this woman, Amber, for over a year. Since before we moved. Since before I gave up my career. A sob escaped my throat, quickly followed by another. I crumpled to the floor, the photos scattered around me like the pieces of my broken life. Mom? Emily's voice cut through my grief. I looked up to see her standing in the doorway, eyes wide with concern. I hastily wiped my tears, trying to gather the photos. It's nothing, sweetie, just some work stuff. But Emily was too quick. She snatched one of the photos, her face paling as she recognized her father with another woman. Is this why Dad left? She whispered. I nodded, unable to lie. I'm so sorry, Emily. You shouldn't have to deal with this. She dropped the photo, her face hardening. We need to confront him. And Grandma Cynthia, too. She knows, doesn't she? Her maturity stunned me. I pulled her into a hug, marveling at her strength. You're right. It's time we face this head on. I called Bradley, my voice steady despite my racing heart. We need to talk, all of us, including your mother. Come to the house tonight. Hours later, we sat in the living room, Emily and I on one couch, Bradley and Cynthia on the other. The photos lay on the coffee table between us, an undeniable testament to Bradley's betrayal. How could you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Bradley's face was ashen. Laura, I can explain. Explain what? Emily interrupted, her voice sharp. How you lied to us, how you made Mom give up everything for you. Cynthia bristled. Now, Emily, that's no way to speak to your father. And you, Emily rounded on her grandmother. You knew, didn't you? You helped him hide it. Cynthia's silence was all the confirmation we needed. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I want a divorce, Bradley. I can't do this anymore. The room exploded into chaos. Bradley pleaded, Cynthia shouted, Emily cried, but I stood firm, a strange calm settling over me. Enough, I shouted, silencing them all. This isn't up for debate. You've made your choices, Bradley. Now I'm making mine. I turned to Cynthia, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. And you never thought I was good enough for your precious son. Well, guess what? He wasn't good enough for me, for us. Cynthia's face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you, after everything we've done for you, what you've done? I laughed bitterly. You've done nothing but undermine and belittle me from day one. Well, I'm done. I'm taking Emily, and we're leaving. Tonight. Bradley stood, reaching for me. Laura, please. We can work this out. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, Bradley. We can't. It's over. As I turned to leave, Cynthia's voice, cold and threatening, stopped me in my tracks. If you leave now, you'll get nothing. We'll make sure of it. You'll be penniless, homeless. Is that what you want for Emily? I froze, the weight of her threat crushing me. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, could I really walk away from it all? Could I subject Emily to a life of struggle just to escape this toxic marriage? As I stood there, torn between my desire for freedom and my fear of the unknown, I realized I was facing the biggest decision of my life. Whatever I chose next would shape not just my future, but Emily's as well. The clock was ticking, and I had to decide, now. Cynthia's threat hung in the air, suffocating me. I looked at Emily, her eyes wide with fear and determination. In that moment, I found my strength. No, I said, my voice steady. You don't get to threaten me anymore. Cynthia, I'm not afraid of you. Bradley stepped forward, his face a mask of desperation. Laura, please, we can work this out. I'll end things with Amber, I swear. I laughed bitterly. End things? Bradley, you've been seeing her for over a year. You moved us here to be closer to her, didn't you? His silence was all the confirmation I needed. I trusted you, I continued, my voice breaking. I gave up everything for you, my career, my friends, my life in the city, and this is how you repay me? Emily squeezed my hand, her voice small but fierce. Mom, we don't need them. We can make it on our own. Cynthia scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. You have nothing without us. No money, no home, no future. Think about Emily's education, Laura. Are you really willing to throw that away? I felt the weight of her words, the fear of an uncertain future. But then I remembered all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, all the times I'd felt small and insignificant in this house. I thought of Emily, forced to keep her father's secret. We'll manage, I said, straightening my spine. We've done it before, we'll do it again. Bradley's face hardened. If you walk out that door, don't expect any help from me. I'll fight you for custody. I'll make sure you don't get a penny. Dad, Emily cried, shock and hurt etched on her face. I felt a surge of rage. You'd do that to your own daughter, after everything you've put her through? He's bluffing, Cynthia interjected, her voice sickly sweet. Bradley, darling, you don't mean that. We can work this out as a family. But I saw the truth in Bradley's eyes. He'd choose his mother and his mistress over us. He always had. Emily, I said, turning to my daughter, this is your choice too. If you want to stay with your father, I'll understand. Emily's eyes flashed with anger. Are you kidding after what he did, after what they both did? She glared at Bradley and Cynthia. I'm going with Mom. Pride swelled in my chest. My brave, beautiful girl. Fine, Bradley spat. Leave. But don't come crawling back when you can't make it on your own. I turned to face him, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. You know what, Bradley? I was successful before I met you. I built a career, a life, and I'll do it again, without you. I grabbed Emily's hand and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, Cynthia's voice stopped me. If you leave now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life, she hissed. You're nothing without this family. I turned back, meeting her gaze. No, Cynthia. I was nothing with this family. But not anymore. With that, I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air, Emily by my side. As we walked to the car, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I felt free. We drove in silence for a while, the enormity of what we'd done settling over us. Then Emily spoke, her voice small in the darkness. Mom, what are we going to do now? I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. We had no home, little money, and an uncertain future. But we had each other, and that was a start. I don't know, sweetie, I admitted, but we'll figure it out together. As the lights of our old town faded in the rearview mirror, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. We were starting over, just the two of us against the world. It wouldn't be easy, but as I glanced at Emily's determined face, I knew we'd make it. The road stretched out before us, dark and unknown, but for the first time in years I felt hope. Whatever came next, we'd face it head on. Together. The key turned in the lock of my old apartment, and I pushed open the door with a mixture of trepidation and hope. Emily stepped in behind me, her eyes wide as she took in the dusty furniture and bare walls. It's small, she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. It is, but it's ours. We spent the next few days cleaning, unpacking the few belongings we'd managed to grab before leaving. It was hard work, but with each box we emptied, each room we made livable, I felt a sense of pride growing. We were rebuilding, one small step at a time. On our third night in the apartment, as we sat on the floor eating takeout, my phone rang. It was Bradley. Laura, his voice was strained. Please, can we talk about this? I made a mistake, but we can fix it. Come home. I closed my eyes, feeling the pull of familiarity, the temptation of an easier path. But then I looked at Emily, her face set in determination as she arranged our meager belongings, and I found my strength. No, Bradley, this is our home now. You made your choice, he sighed, his voice turning cold. Fine, but don't expect any help from me. You're on your own. As I hung up, Emily looked at me, worry etched on her face. Was that Dad? What did he say? I pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Nothing important, sweetie. We're going to be okay. The next morning I woke early, determination coursing through me. I had a plan. I called my old boss, swallowing my pride as I explained my situation. To my surprise, she was sympathetic. "Laura, we've missed you. There's a position opening up next month. It's not as senior as your old role, but it's a start. Are you interested?" Tears of relief sprang to my eyes. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you." With that piece of good news, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We could do this. We would do this. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into preparing for my new job, while helping Emily adjust to her new school. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I lay awake, terrified of the future, missing the comfort of my old life. But each morning I'd wake up and face the day with renewed determination. One evening, as Emily and I were cooking dinner in our tiny kitchen, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my parents standing there, arms laden with groceries and home-cooked meals. "Mom? Dad?" I stammered, shocked to see them. My mother pulled me into a fierce hug. "We're here to help, sweetheart. Whatever you need." As they bustled around our apartment, filling it with warmth and love, I felt the last pieces of my heart mending. We weren't alone in this. Months passed, and slowly but surely we found our rhythm. Emily thrived in her new school, making friends and excelling in her studies. I threw myself into my work, rediscovering the passion and drive I'd forgotten I had. One sunny Saturday, as Emily and I walked through the park near our apartment, she turned to me, her face serious. "Mom, are you happy? Do you ever regret leaving?" I paused, considering her question. I thought about the struggles we'd faced, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, but I also thought about the strength we'd found, the bond between us that had only grown stronger. "No, sweetie," I said, squeezing her hand. "I don't regret it. It's been hard, but we're building something beautiful here. Together." She smiled, a real genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "I'm glad we left. I'm proud of us, Mom." As we continued our walk, the sun warm on our faces, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but we were ready to face them. We had each other, and that was enough. Bradley and Cynthia were wrong. We weren't nothing without them. We were everything, strong, resilient, and full of love. And as I looked at my daughter, her head held high, and her steps confident, I knew that we had already won the most important battle of all. We had found ourselves again, and this time no one could take that away from us. They didn't knock. They never did. My ex-husband and his mother stormed into my parents' house like they still owned me. I was in the kitchen trying to get a handle on dinner while my teenage daughter Emma studied in the dining room. The sudden intrusion made my blood boil. "What are you both doing here?" I demanded, putting down a bowl and stepping into the hallway. Mike smirked, his eyes cold. He hadn't changed. "We have unfinished business, Lisa. It's about the past. About money." I could see Emma peeking out from behind the doorframe, concern etched on her face. She knew enough to stay hidden but close. Carol, Mike's mother, crossed her arms. "This is about what's rightfully ours, Lisa." "Rightfully yours?" I shot back. "You have no right to barge in here." Mike stepped closer, his voice low. "You owe us, Lisa. Owe you. For what?" I spat. The nerve of them. Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mom, do you need me to call Grandpa?" "No, sweetie," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Turning back to Mike, I added, "You need to leave. Now. We have nothing to discuss." Carol's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just walk away from everything without consequences? Think again," I scoffed. "The only consequences are the ones you've brought on yourselves." Mike took another step forward, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "If you won't talk to us willingly, we can take this to court. You can't hide forever, Lisa." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "You're not welcome here. Get out before I call the police." Carol sneered. "You're making a mistake, dear." Mike looked at Emma. "This affects you too, Emma. Think about your future." Emma stepped beside me, taking my hand. "My future doesn't include you," she said, her voice stronger than I felt at that moment. Mike's face hardened. "Fine, we'll be back. You can't run from this forever, Lisa." I watched them leave, slamming the door behind them. Emma hugged me, and I felt my resolve solidify. This wasn't over, but I wouldn't let them bully us anymore. "Mom, what did they mean about money?" Emma asked, her eyes brimming with worry. I sighed, leading her back to the dining room. "It's complicated, honey. They're trying to stir up trouble because they're bitter about the divorce. but we'll deal with it, together. Emma sat down, her face a mixture of concern and determination. You don't have to face them alone, Mom. Her words gave me strength. I know, sweetie, and I won't. We'll handle whatever they throw at us. We're stronger than they think. We continued with dinner, the tension lingering like a bad taste in the air. But in that moment, within the walls of my parents' house, we were safe. I knew we had a battle ahead, but I also knew we had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next. The intrusion had stirred up a storm of emotions, and as I cleared the table, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Mike and Carol were out for blood, and I had to be ready for whatever they planned next. But they underestimated the strength that comes from protecting your own. They underestimated me. The house was quiet after the door slammed shut, but a storm brewed inside me. I watched Emma pick at her food, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Emma, are you okay? I asked, settling down across from her. She looked up, gnawing at her lip. I need to tell you something, Mom. Something about Dad. My stomach tightened. What's going on, honey? Emma hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Before you and Dad divorced, I saw him with another woman. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? When did this happen? Her eyes welled up with tears. A few months before everything happened. I saw them together at a cafe. They were holding hands. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was scared, Mom. I didn't want to make things worse. I hoped it was just nothing, she whispered, biting her lip. I reached across the table, squeezing her trembling hand. It's not your fault, Emma. None of this is. Thank you for telling me now. She nodded, relief washing over her face. What are we going to do, Mom? We're going to find the truth and make sure they face the consequences, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. The next few days were tense. I couldn't shake the image of Mike with another woman. I needed answers. One evening as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, I called my friend Mandy. She was a part-time investigator, and I trusted her. Mandy, I need your help, I said as she picked up. What's going on, Lisa? Her concerned voice was a small comfort. Mike was cheating on me before the divorce. I need proof, and if he's hiding anything else, I need to know. There was a pause before she responded. I'll look into it. But be careful, Lisa. These things can get ugly. I know, but I need to do this for Emma, I replied, glancing at my daughter, who was engrossed in her homework. Emma and I had more conversations over the following week. She remembered small details about the woman she'd seen with Mike, an old friend of mine, Rachel. The betrayal stung deeper, knowing someone I once trusted was involved. One afternoon, I confronted Emma in the living room. Emma, what else do you remember about that woman with your dad? Emma looked up from her book, her eyebrows knit together. She had dark hair, kind of curly. I think it was Rachel. My heart sank. Rachel? Are you sure? Emma nodded slowly. I saw them together more than once, Mom. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, sweetie. You've helped more than you know. I struggled to keep my voice steady. Emma sighed. I wish things were different. We can't change the past, but we can shape our future, I said, wrapping an arm around her. We'll get through this. Mandy soon had news. She'd gathered enough evidence, emails, photos, even financial records, that proved Mike's affair with Rachel. The betrayal was now concrete. As I sifted through the damning evidence, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies and the deceit that ripped through our lives. Mike had to face the consequences, and I would make sure he did. Emma and I were in this together, and that gave me strength. The storm was far from over, but now I had a direction, a purpose. We would expose the truth, and Mike would finally see the fallout from his actions. Over the next few days, I took Mandy's gathered evidence and pieced together the timeline of Mike's affair. The betrayal hurt, but knowing the truth fueled my determination. I needed more. So I called up an old friend who worked at a small-town investigative firm. Lisa, it's been a while, said Jerry as we sat in his cluttered office. Photos filled the walls, trophies of solved cases. He offered me a smile, though his eyes were serious. What can I do for you? I need your help, I replied, handing him the folder Mandy had compiled. My ex-husband, Mike. I need every detail you can find on him, and this woman, Rachel. Jerry flipped through the pages, his brows furrowed. You sure about this? Digging up more might be rough. I'm sure. My voice didn't waver, despite the churning in my gut. I need to know everything. I'll get on it, he said. Give me a few days. As I left his office, a sense of both dread and anticipation hung over me. I busied myself at work, trying to remain focused, but my thoughts always drifted back to the revelations. Days later, Jerry called me. We met at a quiet diner, away from prying eyes. He slid a second folder across the table. You might want to sit down for this. Inside were more than just photos and emails. There were financial statements. Mike had been siphoning money from our joint savings for years, funneling it to secret accounts that funded his double life with Rachel. My finger trembled as I sifted through the evidence. He's been meticulous, Jerry said, sipping his coffee, but not enough to cover his tracks completely. I can't believe this, I murmured. Not just the affair, but the money, our savings. Jerry nodded. He's vile. Betraying your trust like this, what do you plan to do? I closed the folder, a fierce determination rising within me. He thinks he can get away with this, but he's about to learn otherwise. Back home, I spread the new evidence across the dining table. Emma joined me, her eyes wide with curiosity and concern. Mom, what did you find out? Turns out your dad was doing more than just cheating, I said, showing her the papers. He was stealing from us too. Emma looked through the documents, her face a mix of anger and sadness. How could he do this to us? I don't know, honey, I replied, hugging her, but I promise he'll pay for it. Later that night, I called Mandy. I've got more now, enough to confront him. She sighed. Lisa, just be careful. This kind of confrontation can get messy. I know, but I can't let him get away with this. The next day, I arranged a meeting with a family lawyer recommended by Jerry. We discussed the financial evidence, and he assured me we had a solid case. He'll have no choice but to face the consequences, the lawyer said, his voice firm. You've got him cornered. Despite knowing this, a knot of anxiety remained tight in my chest. With the evidence gathered, I now prepared myself for the next step, confronting Mike and Rachel face to face. It was time to reveal what I knew and watch their deceit unravel around them. As I sat on the edge of my bed that night, Emma's quiet presence beside me, I felt a sense of resolve wash over. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming our lives from the shadow of deceit. Together, we'd bring the truth to light, and Mike would finally face the fallout of his actions. With the evidence in hand and a plan forming in my mind, we waited. The storm was about to break, and I braced myself for the confrontation ahead. I sat at the local coffee shop, staring at the door every few seconds. Rachel was late, but I expected nothing less. She liked to make an entrance. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching my mood. Finally, she sauntered in, her hair perfectly styled and her makeup impeccable. She spotted me and rushed over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lisa, long time no see, how are you? Doing well, Rachel. How about you? I kept my voice neutral, gesturing to the seat across from me. She settled in, crossing her legs and leaning forward slightly. Oh, keeping busy. Life after divorce, right? I forced a smile. Right. Funny how things turn out. Her eyes flickered, a brief flash of something guarded. Yeah, funny. So, what have you been up to? Keeping busy myself, I said, taking another sip. Emma and I have been adjusting, moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, I heard you ran into Mike recently. Rachel's smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. Oh, yeah. Small world, huh? Small town, more like, I replied, giving her a pointed look. You never really know people as well as you think you do. She fumbled slightly with her cup. What are you implying? I leaned in, my voice low but firm. I think you know exactly what I'm implying, Rachel. Her face paled slightly before she plastered on another smile. Lisa, if you have something to say, just say it. I know about the affair, I said flatly, watching her reaction closely. I know everything. Rachel's facade cracked. She set her cup down, her hands trembling. Lisa, it's not what you think. So, you weren't having an affair with my husband? You weren't helping him steal from me? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She looked around nervously, her voice a whisper now. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Mike said he was leaving you anyway. He said you were done. And the money? What about that? Was I done with our savings too? I demanded, feeling the anger rise. Lisa, please. Mike planned everything. I just went along with it, she stammered, her eyes pleading. You betrayed me, Rachel. Not just as a friend, but as a human being, I said, standing up. And make no mistake, you'll both pay for this. She reached for me, but I stepped back. Lisa, please, I can help. I can testify against Mike. Just give me a chance. I watched her for a moment, weighing her words. Finally, I nodded. Fine, you want to make it right? Get me more evidence. Show me you're serious. Rachel looked relieved, nodding quickly. I will. I promise. I walked out of the coffee shop, my heart pounding. Step 1 was done. Rachel was scared and willing to turn on Mike. I needed every piece of leverage I could get, and having her on my side, even temporarily, was one more card to play. Back home, I found Emma curled up on the couch, reading. She looked up as I came in, concern in her eyes. How did it go, Mom? As expected, I said, sitting next to her. Rachel's scared. She'll give us more evidence against Mike. Emma nodded, a small smile forming. Good, he can't keep hurting us. No, he can't, I agreed, hugging her tightly. And he won't. We're going to bring him down, Emma. Together. As I held my daughter, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We had the beginnings of a plan, and the pieces were falling into place. Now we just had to see it through. And Mike, well, his time was running out. A week later, Rachel called me, her voice frantic. Lisa, I've got more. Meet me at the park near the old oak tree. I agreed and hurried there, the autumn air chilling my resolve into something harder. Rachel was already waiting, clutching an envelope. Her hands were shaking. Here, she said, thrusting the envelope at me. This is everything I could find. Emails, bank statements, all of it. I opened the envelope, my eyes scanning the documents. It was damning evidence, proof of Mike's betrayal and greed. Why are you doing this, Rachel? I asked, still not fully trusting her. She looked down, tears filling her eyes. I made a mistake, Lisa. A huge mistake. I thought he loved me, but I see now that he was using me. I just want to make things right. I nodded, pocketing the envelope. All right, but this doesn't absolve you. You still played a part. I know, she whispered, looking broken. But please, take him down. He deserves it. You can count on that, I said, turning to leave. Stay out of the way. This is between me and Mike now. Back home, I spread the new evidence across the table, my breath catching in my throat. Mandy walked in, her eyes widening at the sight. That's quite a haul. Yeah, I said, passing her a stack of emails. This should prove he was siphoning money for years. Mandy scanned through them, her face hardening. Lisa, this isn't just about an affair anymore. This is fraud, plain and simple. Exactly, I replied, organizing the papers, and he's going to face the consequences. Are you ready for this? Mandy's voice was cautious but supportive. I nodded. More than ever. The following day, I made copies of everything and met with our family lawyer. He inspected the evidence, nodding approvingly. You've got a solid case, Lisa. Mike won't be able to squirm out of this. Good, I said, leaning back in my chair, because I want him to face every bit of it. Our plan was simple but effective. Use the evidence to confront Mike and Rachel publicly, ensuring they couldn't deny or hide from their actions. Later, as I sat in my office at work, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Emma. Mom, what's the next step? I replied quickly, we confront them at the community fundraiser this weekend. Be ready. My heart raced as the night of the fundraiser approached. Emma and I walked through the crowded event, my mind focused on the plan. Mike and Rachel were there, chatting with guests, oblivious to the storm heading their way. I approached them, my voice loud enough to catch everyone's attention. Enjoying your evening? Because it's about to get a lot more interesting. Mike's face turned ashen, pure rage flickering in his eyes. Lisa, what are you doing? Exposing the truth, I replied, holding out the envelope. We all deserve to know what you've been up to. A murmur spread through the crowd as I detailed Mike's theft and infidelity. Faces turned from curious to disgusted, and whispers grew louder. Rachel looked ready to flee, guilt written all over her face. Lisa, please, don't do this. It's too late for that, I said, my voice unwavering. You both betrayed and stole from me. Now everyone knows. A crowd member called out, Isn't that Mike? What's going on? Mike's facade crumbled and he snarled. You've ruined me, Lisa. I met his glare with steel. No, Mike, you ruined yourself. It felt like a weight had lifted as I walked away, Emma beside me. The truth was out, and the fallout had begun. Mike and Rachel had nowhere to hide now. Emma hugged me tightly once we were outside. We're going to be okay, right, Mom? I kissed her forehead, feeling the strength in her embrace. Yes, sweetie, we are. Together, We're going to be just fine. As we headed home, the night sky clear above us, I knew one thing for sure. The future was ours to rebuild, one step at a time. The truth was burning inside me, ready to explode. It was time to face them. I stood in the thick of the crowd at the community fundraiser, feeling the weight of the confrontation ahead. Emma was at my side, her hand squeezing mine in silent support. I caught sight of Mike, flanked by a few colleagues, his charm on full display. Rachel hovered nearby, eyeing me with a mix of fear and defiance. It was now or never. I cleared my throat and stepped forward, raising my voice enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I have something important to share. Heads turned in my direction, and the room fell silent. Mike's eyes narrowed, his smile faltering. Lisa, what are you doing? Enough lies, Mike, I said, holding up the stack of evidence. It's time everyone knows the truth about you and Rachel. A murmur spread through the crowd as I began laying out the details, the affair, the theft, the betrayal. Faces turned from curious to shocked to disgusted. Rachel looked like a deer in headlights, frozen as I revealed their sordid secrets one by one. Mike's been siphoning money from our joint account for years. I said, my voice unwavering. He's been using it to fund his affair with Rachel. Enjoying your evening because it's about to get a lot more interesting, I added, turning to face the two of them fully. The anger in Mike's eyes was unmistakable. Lisa, shut up! But I was far from finished. You betrayed me, lied to me, and stole from our family, I continued, addressing the crowd more than Mike, and it's time to face the consequences. A ripple of gasps and whispers swept through the room. Someone in the crowd shouted, Isn't that Mike? What's going on? Mike lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers from my hands. You've ruined me, Lisa. I stepped back, holding the evidence high. No, Mike, you ruined yourself. Rachel finally found her voice, her tone desperate. I tried to stop him, Lisa. You have to believe me. Believe you? I laughed bitterly. You're just as guilty. You knew exactly what you were doing. The air was thick with tension as the fundraiser organizers pulled me aside, trying to defuse the situation. But the damage was done. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. As Mike and Rachel stood there, exposed and humiliated, the crowd began to turn against them. Colleagues avoided their gaze, friends whispered behind cupped hands, and some even walked away in disgust. My lawyer, who had been conveniently present, stepped forward, taking the stack of evidence from me. We'll be in touch, Mike. I suggest you prepare yourself. Mike glared at me one last time before storming out, Rachel trailing after him. The room gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the tension lingered like a bad odor. Emma hugged me tightly, her eyes shining with pride. We did it, Mom. We really did it. I kissed the top of her head, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Yes, we did. And now we can start to move on. We left the event, the cold night air feeling like a fresh start. As we walked hand in hand, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be ours to walk, free from the shadows of deceit. Back at the house, as Emma drifted off to sleep, I sat by the window, looking out into the darkness. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. The truth was out, and the healing could finally begin. Together, Emma and I would rebuild our lives, one step at a time. The fallout began almost immediately. Mike's phone calls went unanswered as colleagues, friends, and even family members turned their backs. His once flawless reputation lay in ruins. At work, the whispers grew louder until they reached the ears of his superiors. I received a call from an old friend who worked in Mike's company, the tone hushed and serious. Lisa, you won't believe it. They're launching an internal investigation into Mike's finances. He might lose his job. Good, I replied coldly. He deserves everything that's coming to him. Meanwhile, Rachel's world was unraveling too. Her husband, blindsided by the affair and fraud, filed for divorce immediately. She showed up at my doorstep one evening, eyes red and swollen. She clutched a piece of paper in her hand. Lisa, please, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I need to talk to you. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. What do you want, Rachel? She took a deep breath, shoving the paper toward me. It's the divorce papers. I don't know what to do. That's not my problem, Rachel. You made your bed, I said firmly, my sympathy buried under layers of betrayal. Please, I didn't know it would end like this, she cried, her tears falling freely. I lost everything. You didn't think about that when you were stealing from me, did you? I snapped. You should leave. My life is falling apart, Lisa, she screamed, desperation etched on her face. I'm losing everything. And you think I should care? You brought this on yourself, I replied, shutting the door on her pleading eyes. The next few days brought more chaos for Mike. He was suspended pending the investigation, and the bank froze his accounts. Every time he tried to reach out to me, I ignored his calls. Emma and I were determined to move forward. Mom, you look tired. Are you okay? Emma asked one evening as we sat on the couch, the TV playing softly in the background. I'm fine, sweetie, I said, squeezing her hand. Just thinking about how everything is changing. Emma's face grew serious. Do we have to see Dad again? I shook my head. Not if we don't want to. We have the power to decide what's best for us. She nodded, her expression softer. Good. I don't want to see him. I understand, I replied, pulling her into a hug. We're going to be all right, Emma. The next afternoon, as I was organizing the documents to finalize the legal battles, Mike showed up at my office. He looked disheveled and desperate. Lisa, we need to talk, he said, barging in past my protests. What do you want, Mike? I said, my patience wearing thin. You've ruined me, Lisa. Everything's falling apart, he hissed, eyes filled with a mixture of anger and fear. No, Mike, you ruined yourself, I shot back. You lied, cheated, and stole. Did you expect no consequences? He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I lost my job. The investigation's tearing me apart. Please, help me fix this. I stared at him, incredulous. Help you? You're unbelievable. After everything you've done, you expect me to help you? Please, Lisa. For Emma's sake, he begged, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. Don't bring her into this. She's suffered enough because of you, I said coldly. Get out of my office, Mike. Face your consequences as like an adult. His shoulders sagged as he walked out, the reality of his actions weighing him down. I watched him leave, my heart steady, knowing I had made the right choice. As the days turned into weeks, the repercussions of Mike's actions unraveled further. Rachel moved out of town, trying to escape the scandal. Mike's life continued to crumble, each new day stripping away a piece of his former self. Through it all, Emma and I found our footing in our new normal, taking it day by day. We weren't just surviving, we were starting to thrive. And that was the best revenge of all. The sun shone brightly as Emma and I unpacked the last of the boxes in our new home. It was a modest house in a quieter part of town, but it felt like a fresh start. Mom, where should I put these books? Emma asked, holding up a stack. Let's set up a small bookshelf in the living room, I suggested, smiling at her enthusiasm. We worked together, arranging our things with care. Each item found its place, and with each box emptied, the house started to feel more like home. In the early evening, as we relaxed on the couch, Emma turned to me. Do you think Dad will ever get his life together? I sighed, thinking of the wreckage Mike had made of his own life. I don't know, Emma. That's up to him now. But we don't have to worry about that anymore. She nodded, her face serene. I'm glad we're here, Mom. It feels right. Me too, sweetie, I said, hugging her close. We're starting a new chapter. To celebrate our new beginning, we decided to have a small dinner party. I invited Mandy and a few close friends. They came with warm smiles and housewarming gifts, their presence filling the house with laughter and joy. Mandy pulled me aside later in the evening, her eyes twinkling. You've come a long way, Lisa. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Mandy, I said, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I couldn't have done it without you. As the night wound down and our guests left, Emma and I sat on the porch, gazing at the stars. She leaned her head on my shoulder. We're going to be okay, right, Mom? Yes, we are, sweetie. Together, I assured her, kissing her forehead. The days turned into weeks, and we settled into our new routine. Emma thrived in her new school, with Swaff making friends and engaging in activities she enjoyed. I found solace in my work and the rhythm of our new life. One afternoon, I received a letter from Mike. He had lost everything, his job, his home, and most of his friends. But the tone of the letter was different. It wasn't angry or blaming. It was reflective, almost remorseful. Lisa, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I realize the depth of my mistakes. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you and Emma. I hope you both find the happiness you deserve. I read the letter twice, feeling a mix of emotions. I decided not to respond. Mike's journey was his own now, and I needed to focus on ours. "Morn, everything okay?" Emma asked, noticing my thoughtful expression. "Yeah," I said, smiling, "just thinking about how far we've come." "Me too," she said, her eyes bright. "I can't wait to see what's next." Life continued, filled with small, meaningful moments that stitched our days together. Emma and I grew stronger, not just as individuals but as a family unit. We learned to cherish the quiet joy of everyday life, free from the shadow of deceit and betrayal. One Saturday morning, Emma and I decided to plant a garden in the backyard. As we dug into the soil, planting seeds for the future, we laughed and talked about our dreams. "One day this garden will be full of flowers," Emma said, her eyes shining with hope. "Yes, it will," I agreed, feeling the richness of the soil in my hands, just like our lives. As the sun set, casting a golden hue over our new home, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been hard, filled with pain and betrayal, but we had come out stronger. The future stretched before us, a path we would walk together, step by step, one day at a time. And for the first time in a long while, I knew we would be all right.
All right, so let me just dive straight into how things went down. I was 10 when my parents split up, and to say I didn't handle it well would be a massive understatement. I mean, what kid is going to take something like that well? But for me, it hit hard. Real hard. Looking back, I guess they just fell out of love or whatever. But at the time, all I could see was that the two people I relied on the most suddenly didn't want to be together anymore. I remember being confused and angry all the time, lashing out at both of them, mostly at my dad, though. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like he was the one responsible for ruining everything. We went through the motions, counseling and all that, but if I'm honest, it was a waste of time. My mom was the only one who seemed like she was really trying to get me or where I was coming from. My dad, on the other hand, had this suck-it-up attitude about everything. He didn't get how much I was hurting, and if I'm being real, I don't think he cared. He was more focused on keeping it all together for himself than thinking about what I was going through. I don't know, maybe that's just how he deals with stuff. We never really connected much after that, and it felt like we were just two strangers living in the same house. I stayed mostly with my mom, which was fine by me because we were always closer. I only went to my dad's place on weekends or for short breaks. Not gonna lie, I kind of dreaded those weekends. It was awkward, and I didn't feel like I belonged there anymore. But things took a turn when I was about 14. That's when my mom decided to remarry. Now, don't get me wrong, I wanted her to be happy. But her new husband, let's just call him Mike, wasn't exactly thrilled about having me around. I don't know if it was me, or if he just didn't want a kid who wasn't his own in his life, but the vibes were clear. I wasn't welcome. And then, just like that, my mom made a choice. She picked her new life with him over me. I can't even begin to describe how that felt. It was like one moment she was my rock, the only one who understood me, and the next she was pushing me out of her life. She told me it was for the best, and that I should live with my dad. Yeah, right. For her best, maybe. I was crushed. I felt abandoned. Like, how do you go from being the center of someone's world to being shoved aside because their new husband doesn't want to deal with you? It didn't make sense to me then, and honestly, it still doesn't now. So, I packed up and moved in with my dad and his fiancée, Olivia. Now, Olivia was a piece of work. She'd been with my dad for a while at that point, and she had this weird idea that she could just step in and be my mom or something. I wasn't having any of that. I was still reeling from being ditched by my actual mom, and here's this woman trying to act like everything was normal. I shut that down quick. I didn't need or want another mom, especially not one who didn't get me or my situation. My dad, of course, didn't really notice or care about how I was feeling. He was too busy playing happy family with Olivia to realize that I was struggling. To him, it was like I should just get over it, move on, and adjust to the new family dynamic. But how the hell was I supposed to adjust when my life had been turned upside down? Living with them sucked, plain and simple. Every day felt like I was just trying to survive in a place where I didn't belong. Olivia was always hovering, trying to get me to open up to her or do things as a family. I wasn't interested. The more she pushed, the more I pulled back. And my dad? He acted like everything was fine. Like me being there was no big deal. Meanwhile, I was grieving the fact that my mom had basically ditched me for a guy who couldn't stand the sight of me. There were times when I thought about running away, just leaving and seeing where I ended up. It was that bad. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed, kept my head down, and counted the days until I could get out for good. I threw myself into school, focused on getting into college, and planned my escape that way. I figured if I could just make it to college, I'd be free. All right, so I made it through high school without completely losing my mind, but living with Olivia and my dad was rough. Every day was just tension. Like, there was no big blow up or anything, but it was always there, you know? That feeling that I wasn't wanted. Olivia wasn't mean to me outright, but she had this way of making me feel like I was just in the way, like everything would have been easier if I wasn't around. She never said it, but I could feel it. And then there was Jess, her daughter. Now, Jess wasn't the issue at first. She was all right, we weren't close, but she wasn't a total brat or anything. It was just awkward, because Olivia would constantly go out of her way to make sure Jess was the center of everything. Like, Jess got special treatment for everything. Olivia was constantly pulling strings to make her life easier. Sports teams, school plays, whatever Jess wanted, Olivia would make it happen. And Jess? She kind of just went along with it. She wasn't exactly spoiled rotten, but she didn't push back either. She just accepted that her mom was going to smooth everything over for her no matter what. Meanwhile, I was just in the background trying to stay out of the way and not cause any drama. Living with them was like living in someone else's home. My dad had his own life with Olivia, and I was just there. I mean, sure, I had a room, but it never felt like mine. It was more like a guest room where they just let me crash. I tried to keep busy with school and avoided being home as much as possible. I'd hang out at friends' places or stay late at the library, basically doing anything to not deal with being at the house. But then things started to get complicated when Jess started acting weird. It was like, overnight, she went from just being Olivia's daughter, who I tolerated, to this person who was constantly hovering around whenever I brought someone over, especially when it was Ethan. Yeah, I know I haven't mentioned him yet, but this is where he comes into the picture. So Ethan and I started dating when I was in college. We were both studying at USC, and things were going well between us. He's a good guy, and I really liked him. Naturally, I started bringing him over to my dad's house sometimes, and at first, it was fine. But then, out of nowhere, Jess started acting all weird around him. Like, she'd get super shy and quiet, which wasn't her usual vibe at all. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I just figured maybe she was having a bad day or whatever, but it didn't stop. Every time Ethan came over, Jess would be all flustered like a middle schooler with a crush. She'd hang around when we were trying to talk, asking him random questions, and just being there. It started to get really awkward, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I figured it'd blow over eventually, right? Wrong. It only got worse. Jess was straight up obsessed with Ethan. She started making excuses to be in the same room as us, or she'd just randomly show up when we were hanging out. I even caught her staring at him a few times. It was super uncomfortable, and I didn't know how to handle it at first. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Tell my dad that his fiance's daughter had a crush on my boyfriend? That wouldn't end well, and I knew it. So I tried to handle it myself. I pulled Jess aside one day and straight up asked her if she had feelings for Ethan. She looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her up, but she didn't deny it. She didn't even say anything, just kind of nodded and avoided eye contact. I told her that this was really weird and awkward for me, and she needed to back off. I thought that would be enough to put an end to it, but nope. If anything, it got worse. Jess started acting all dramatic after that. Her grades slipped, and she was moping around the house like she was heartbroken. I'd hear her crying in her room at night, and Olivia, being Olivia, noticed. Of course, she had to get involved. Instead of talking to Jess like a normal parent, Olivia decided that it was somehow my fault that Jess was a mess. She cornered me one day in the kitchen and accused me of flaunting my relationship with Ethan to make Jess feel bad. Like, seriously? How was it my fault that Jess had a crush on my boyfriend? It was ridiculous. But Olivia was dead serious. She told me I needed to be more considerate and suggested that maybe I shouldn't bring Ethan around anymore, for Jess's sake. Yeah, no, that wasn't happening. I told her flat out that I wasn't going to stop seeing Ethan just because Jess had a thing for him. If anything, Jess needed to learn how to deal with her feelings like an adult, not expect me to bend over backward to make her feel better. Olivia didn't like that answer, and she went straight to my dad about it. Now, my dad's always been the kind of guy who avoids conflict, so of course, he tried to play peacemaker. He sat me down one night and gave me this whole speech about how I needed to be more understanding and that maybe I should take a break from seeing Ethan for a while. You know, for the sake of the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My dad was seriously suggesting I break up with my boyfriend just because Jess had a crush on him? I laughed in his face. I didn't mean to, but it was so ridiculous I couldn't help it. I told him there was no way I was ending my relationship just because Olivia and Jess couldn't handle their feelings. That conversation turned into a massive argument. My dad kept going on about how I needed to think of Jess's feelings and how I was making things harder for everyone. I just kept telling him that it wasn't my problem. I wasn't going to change my life to make things easier for them. If Jess couldn't handle seeing Ethan around, that was on her, not me. By the end of it, it was clear that things weren't going to get any better. My dad was siding with Olivia, and I wasn't going to give in to their demands. The tension in the house was unbearable after that. I couldn't even look at Jess without feeling angry, and every time Olivia opened her mouth, it was just to make passive-aggressive comments about how hard things were for Jess. I knew then that I couldn't stay there much longer. This wasn't my home anymore, and honestly, I didn't think it ever really was. My dad had chosen his new life with Olivia and Jess, and I was just an outsider. I needed to get out, and fast. So yeah, that's how things went downhill with Jess, Olivia, and my dad. It was like everything was building up to that moment, and once it hit, there was no going back. I was done. Done with the drama, done with the feeling of not belonging. It was time to make a move, and I knew I had to do it soon. So, after that whole mess with Jess and Olivia, things at my dad's house just kept getting worse. I was basically living in a pressure cooker, waiting for the next explosion. Every day felt tense and awkward. If I wasn't at school, I tried to be anywhere but home. It was just getting unbearable. But then things hit a new level of crazy, and that's when I realized I had to get out for real. I guess I should have seen it coming, but it still threw me. One night, my dad asked me to sit down and have a family meeting. Now, if you've ever been in a dysfunctional family, you know that those words usually mean bad news. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I figured, fine, let's get this over with. We all sat down in the living room. Me, my dad, Olivia, and Jess. And honestly, from the looks on their faces, I knew this was going to be some sort of intervention. My dad started off with this whole speech about how the tension in the house was affecting everyone, how we all needed to figure out a way to get along better. I didn't say anything, just nodded along, waiting for him to get to the point. Then Olivia jumps in. She starts talking about how Jess has been struggling lately, which I already knew, and that the situation with Ethan wasn't helping. And I'm just sitting there thinking, great, here we go again. But instead of going down the usual path of blaming me, she drops this bomb on me. We think it would be best if you took a break from seeing Ethan for a while. I swear I almost laughed again. Like, seriously? This again? But she wasn't done. Olivia went on to explain that Jess needed time to process her emotions and that my relationship with Ethan was distracting her from focusing on her own life. She made it sound like I was causing Jess to fail at school or something, which was total BS. At that point, I couldn't hold back. I just said, "You can't be serious. You want me to put my life on hold because Jess has a crush on my boyfriend? How is that my problem?" Olivia didn't like that at all. She got this tight look on her face, and my dad jumped in to back her up, saying that they weren't asking me to break up with Ethan, just to give things some space. I told them flat out that it wasn't happening. There was no way I was going to stop seeing Ethan just because Jess couldn't handle it. If she had a problem, she needed to deal with it, not make it everyone else's issue. The room went dead silent after that. You could cut the tension with a knife. Jess, who had been staring at the floor the whole time, suddenly looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I knew Jess had a thing for Ethan, but seeing her like that, so genuinely upset, made me pause for a second. But then Olivia jumped back in, twisting the knife by saying, "We just want what's best for everyone, especially for Jess. We all need to make sacrifices sometimes for the good of the family." At that point, I'd had enough. "Sacrifices?" I snapped. "What have you sacrificed, Olivia? All I've done since I moved in here is try to stay out of your way. I've given up enough. I'm not giving up Ethan, too." My dad didn't say anything for a long moment. He just sat there, looking tired and defeated, like he didn't even want to be part of this conversation anymore. Finally, he sighed and said, "We're just trying to make things work, that's all. We don't want to force you to do anything, but we can't keep living with this tension." I stared at him, wondering how he couldn't see how messed up this whole situation was. I'd always known he wasn't the best at handling emotions, but this was a whole new level of avoidance. Instead of dealing with the real problem, they were all just putting the blame on me. I stood up, and that's when I said it. "I can't do this anymore. I'm done." The words just came out, but as soon as I said them, I knew it was the truth. I couldn't stay there any longer. Living with them wasn't healthy. It was making me angry and resentful, and I deserved better than that. I didn't know where I was going to go or how I was going to make it work, but I couldn't stay there. Olivia looked at my dad, like she couldn't believe I'd actually said it. Jess just sat there, her face crumpled in on itself, looking miserable. And my dad? He didn't even try to stop me. He just nodded, like he expected it. Then my dad said, "If you don't break up with Ethan, I can't let you live here." "Fine," I said. "I'll be out by the end of the week." And that was that. I left the room, went to my room, and started packing. I didn't even know where I was going, but I started putting stuff into boxes anyway. Part of me was angry, but another part of me just felt relieved. I didn't have to deal with their crap anymore. I could just walk away and leave it all behind. Over the next couple of days, I packed up everything I owned. I barely spoke to anyone in the house. Olivia acted like she didn't care, and Jess kept to herself, probably embarrassed about the whole thing. My dad tried to talk to me once, but it was just more of the same. Him trying to make peace without actually fixing anything. I didn't tell him where I was going when I left. I didn't think he even cared. The day I moved out, I loaded up my car, looked back at the house one last time, and then I drove off. I didn't look back. Leaving wasn't easy. I was scared and uncertain about what would happen next, but I also knew that staying in that house wasn't an option anymore. My dad had made his choice. He'd chosen his new family over me, and I wasn't going to stick around and be a second thought in my own life. I didn't really know what the future held for me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done with the toxic mess my life had become in that house. It was time to figure out who I was and what I wanted without them dragging me down. It was time to start living for me, not for them. So, after I left my dad's house, it was like a weird mix of relief and straight-up panic. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have a solid plan or anywhere permanent to stay right away, but I knew I couldn't stay in that toxic mess any longer. It was like getting out of a pressure cooker. Yeah, things were calm for a minute, but now I had to figure out how to survive on my own. At first, I crashed at my friend Kayla's place. She had this tiny apartment not too far from campus, and she was cool enough to let me stay with her for a while. I didn't want to be a burden, so I told her it was temporary, just until I figured things out. I started looking for a job immediately. Even though I was still in school, I knew I had to start making money if I was going to pay for rent and all that. Those first few weeks were rough. I was working random shifts at a 24-hour diner, mostly late nights and weekends. I didn't have much choice. I needed the money. It wasn't the best job in the world, but it paid enough to keep me afloat. Between working, going to class, and studying, I barely had time to think. And honestly, that was probably for the best. But every now and then, when I had a quiet moment, I'd start thinking about everything that had happened with my family. It was hard not to feel angry and a little lost. I mean, I knew I made the right choice by leaving, but that didn't make it any easier to accept that my dad had chosen Olivia and Jess over me. It stung. Bad. It felt like I wasn't even part of his life anymore, like I'd been replaced. The worst part? He didn't even reach out after I left. Not a single phone call or text to see if I was okay. It was like I just disappeared, and he didn't care enough to check. That hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I was trying not to dwell on it too much. I had to focus on building my own life now, without relying on him. After about a month of couch surfing at Kayla's, I finally found a tiny studio apartment that I could afford. It wasn't much, just a small room with a bathroom and a kitchenette, but it was mine. It felt good to have my own space, somewhere I didn't have to walk on eggshells all the time. The first night I slept there, I remember just lying on the floor, since I didn't have any furniture yet, feeling this huge wave of relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could actually breathe. But of course, life wasn't going to let me off that easy. About 2 weeks after I moved in, I got a text from my dad. It was short and cold, like he was writing an email to a coworker or something. He said something like, "Hope you're doing well. Let me know when you have time to talk." That was it. No apology. No, "I miss you." Nothing. Just a sterile message that felt more like an obligation than him actually wanting to talk. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how I felt about it. Part of me wanted to reply, to open up some kind of dialogue and maybe, just maybe, fix things. But the other part of me, the part that was still pissed off and hurt, wanted to just ignore him. Why should I be the one to reach out when he hadn't bothered to check on me in weeks? Why should I care when he clearly didn't? In the end, I didn't respond. I just couldn't. It wasn't about being petty or trying to punish him. It was more like, what was the point? What could we possibly say to each other that would fix everything? I wasn't ready to go back to that mess, and honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. Instead, I threw myself into work and school. I was grinding nonstop, doing whatever I could to keep moving forward. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to be doing something for myself for once. I wasn't living under anyone's roof or dealing with their drama. This was my life now, and I was determined to make it work. Ethan was a huge support during this time. He never pressured me about the whole family situation, but he was there when I needed someone to vent to or just to hang out and distract me from everything. He'd come over to my new place after his classes, and we'd sit on the floor, still no furniture by the way, and just talk about anything but my family. It was nice to have someone who got me without all the baggage attached. But despite trying to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, the whole thing with my dad weighed on me. I hated that I still cared. I hated that part of me wanted him to call or show up at my door, apologizing for everything and asking me to come back. But that wasn't going to happen, and deep down, I knew it. Weeks turned into months, and eventually, I got into a routine. The diner job wasn't great, but it paid the bills, and I was managing to keep up with school. Kayla and I stayed close, and Ethan was still by my side. I was starting to feel like I had some control over my life again. But every now and then, when I was alone in that quiet apartment, I'd get this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Like, what if I'd made a mistake? What if cutting off my dad wasn't the right move? I kept telling myself that I did what I had to do, that I couldn't stay in that toxic environment. And yeah, that was true. But still, it's not easy walking away from your family no matter how bad things get. There's always that little voice in your head wondering if there was another way, if maybe things could have been different. But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the fact that I was finally in control of my own life. I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself, and that was a freedom I hadn't felt in years. And even though it was hard, I knew I'd made the right choice. So that's where I was, living in my tiny apartment, working long shifts, and trying to figure out what my next move was. I hadn't heard from my dad or Olivia since that text, and honestly, I was okay with that. I was starting to build something for myself, and that felt pretty damn good. All right, so things got messy after I left, but what really surprised me was how bad it got for them. I didn't expect their lives to fall apart like they did. It's almost like karma was just waiting for the right moment to come down hard on them. A few months after I had fully cut ties with my dad, Olivia, and Jess, I started hearing bits and pieces about what was going on with them. I wasn't trying to keep tabs on them or anything, but mutual friends and old neighbors would drop little tidbits in conversations. And from what I heard, their perfect life was slowly unraveling. It started small, arguments between my dad and Olivia, tensions at home. But eventually, things spiraled. Turns out, after I left, Jess really went off the rails. She wasn't just sulking over her unrequited crush on Ethan like she had been before. No, she fully spiraled. She dropped out of college not long after I moved out. At first, it seemed like she was just taking a break, but the truth was, she couldn't handle the pressure. Without Olivia constantly smoothing things over for her, Jess was left to deal with real life, and she couldn't do it. She started hanging out with the wrong crowd, getting into trouble. It got bad enough that Olivia, who once coddled Jess like she was made of glass, couldn't even control her anymore. And that's when things at home went from tense to chaotic. Olivia was freaking out because her perfect little girl was slipping through her fingers, and my dad? He was caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace like he always did. But this time it wasn't working. I heard that Jess ended up getting arrested. Twice. The first time was for shoplifting, and Olivia managed to get her out of it, pulling some strings with one of her lawyer friends. But the second time, it was worse. Apparently, Jess had been caught with some drugs at a party, and there was no quick fix for that. She was facing real charges, and Olivia couldn't just throw money at the problem to make it go away. From what I was told, this was the final straw for my dad. He had already been on edge dealing with Olivia's control issues and Jess's breakdown. But now, with legal problems and their reputations on the line, he snapped. They were constantly fighting. I mean, screaming matches, doors slamming, the works. And the thing is, Olivia had no one to blame but herself. She created this mess, but instead of admitting that, she tried to pin it on my dad, saying he wasn't supportive enough or that he wasn't leading the family. Classic deflection. Then there was the financial disaster. I found out through some old neighbors that my dad had made some bad investments after getting pressured by Olivia to expand their wealth. Olivia had always been obsessed with status, having the nicest house, the newest car, and of course being better than my mom ever was. She pushed my dad to invest in some sketchy real estate deal thinking they'd make a quick profit. Spoiler alert, it didn't work out. They lost a lot of money. Like, we're talking almost all of my dad's savings. The house they were living in, they were on the verge of losing it. Olivia had spent years pretending they were living the high life, and now it was all crumbling down around them. My dad, who had worked his whole life to build some kind of stability, was now facing the possibility of having nothing. And guess what? Olivia bailed. Yep, when things got too tough for her, she packed her bags and left. She wasn't about to stick around and deal with the consequences of the mess she helped create. From what I heard, she ran off with some guy who had more money, someone she met through one of her fancy social circles. It was typical Olivia, always chasing the next best thing, never sticking around when things got hard. So there was my dad, left with nothing. His wife had left him, his daughter was in serious legal trouble, and he was drowning in debt. I remember thinking, well, this is what happens when you pick the wrong side. And yeah, maybe that sounds harsh, but I couldn't feel bad for him. Not after everything he'd put me through. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from my dad. It wasn't like the cold, business-like messages from before. This one had some desperation in it. He asked if we could talk. Said he needed to explain everything. I didn't respond right away. I mean, what was there to talk about? He chose Olivia and her perfect little life over me. And now that it was all falling apart, he wanted to reconnect? I wasn't interested in playing savior for him. But a week later, I got another text, and this one hit harder. He was asking for help. Financial help. Can you believe that? After everything that happened, he had the nerve to ask me for money. Said he was in a tough spot and that he didn't know where else to turn. I stared at that message for a long time, just trying to wrap my head around it. I guess that was his last play. Olivia was gone, Jess was a wreck, and now he was broke. The guy who had never really been there for me, who chose his new family over his own daughter, was asking for a lifeline. It was hard to believe, but at the same time, I wasn't shocked. When you build your life on someone else's terms, it falls apart just as easily. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. He made his choices, and now he had to live with them. It was kind of poetic in a way. The perfect little life he built around Olivia had crumbled, and now he was left standing in the ruins. Meanwhile, I was doing just fine. I had my own place, my own life, and I didn't need him anymore. That's the thing about karma. It doesn't care how long it takes. It just waits for the right moment to show up. And when it does, it doesn't hold back.